Welcome to Lesson 23 in our survey of the Old Testament, 39 weeks to Malachi. We come to the end of the portion of the Old Testament scripture called the books of poetry, or books of wisdom. In this survey, we'll be looking at Song of Songs, or more commonly known as Song of Solomon, a study entitled When Love is Real. Most everyone likes a good love story. They make people feel warm and fuzzy all over. They may even inspire folks to be as loving and considerate as the make-believe lover standing atop the Empire State Building on Valentine's Day. And do we really need another movie that ends up there? Humanity loves a love story. That love may be motivated in the biblical truth that we are made in the likeness and image of God. Such being the case, since God is love, it is only logical to conclude that we have a God-given bent to love as well. One of the greatest expressions of that love is found between a husband and a wife. Enter the Song of Solomon. There is little debate that this book was written by King Solomon. It says in chapter 1, verse 1, Solomon's Song of Songs, though some suggest that someone else wrote this for Solomon as a tribute to his love to the Shunammite woman. But be that as it may, most believe that it was Solomon, and that would put the writing somewhere between 962 and 922 BC. However, considering the purity of the love expressed, it would also be reasonable to place the writing early in the reign of the king, prior to his days of 700 wives and 300 concubines. The book Song of Solomon has many great verses that could be used to summarize the book. But one coming at the end of the song, in chapter 8, the words of the beloved to her husband may well encapsulate the desire of her heart, what she wants most of all in her relationship with her husband. She says this, "Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death, and jealousy as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are like flashes of fire, the very fire of the Lord." Of course, the theme of this book is the theme of love. Married couples need to express to one another why and how deep their love for one another is. That's what this book is written about. From chapter 1 to chapter 8, we have a constant expression of love between the lover and his beloved, between the husband and his wife. Intermittently throughout the book, we have friends entering in and extolling and encouraging the couple to allow their love to run deep, but also to keep it within the right framework, the right parameters of where genuine love belongs, and that's the love between a husband and a wife. In the English Bible, the title of the book is Song of Solomon, based on chapter 1, verse 1. In the Hebrew, it's Song of Songs, based on the same verse, but with the idea that this is Solomon's greatest of his 1,500 songs that were told he penned, according to 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 32. We would say this is the greatest of his songs, thus his Song of Songs. Within the canon, there has been discussion on the place of Song of Solomon. This book was disputed for many years. It was not until around 100 AD that it gained a strong affirmation by Rabbi Akiba, who said this, "The whole world is not worthy of the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. All the writings are holy, and the Song of Songs is the holy of holies." The reason for the controversy? The sensual message of the book. For many, as they read the book, it was way too explicit. And they said, surely this book does not have a place within the collection of God's Word that we call the canon, because it's too earthy. There's too much about intimate relationships. So this book really doesn't belong. But because of the comment of Rabbi Akiba, saying that this book speaks of the greatest kind of love, and we'll see what he means in just a moment, it needs to be included in the canon. And so, again, in the Council of Jamnia, around 100 AD, the scholars, the Jewish scholars and rabbis who completed the collection of the Old Testament that we call the Old Testament, that they call the Tanakh, was completed, and Song of Songs found its way there. Again, not by the decisions of men, but by the decisions of men led by God. Now, that is not to say that the book of Song of Solomon found its way into the canon by looking at it at its most literal interpretation. The Jews looked at the book as a picture of the perfect love between God and Israel. Thus, in looking at the book, they weren't looking at it in the sense of the love between a man and a woman, that intimate, sensual love between a husband and a wife, but rather God's interaction with his people, how he loved them and how they were to love him. In the New Testament period, the early church saw it as a picture of Christ's love for his church. Remember, Jesus talked about the church being his bride. And they looked at this and they said, no, this really isn't the love between a man and a woman, but this is how Christ loves his church and gave himself for it. However, reading the book, reading it in its simplicity, we see that it is the picture of love and devotion between a husband and a wife. Thus, we find within its pages that intimate love that a husband and wife do experience is part of God's gift to humanity. And it is a beautiful and wonderful thing when kept within the boundaries that God has set, the boundaries of marriage. I believe that the third interpretation is the interpretation God would have us understand, though the other two make good allegory and are reasonable and are acceptable. But I believe what God is wanting us to see here is that the marriage that he gave to humanity, where a man could marry a woman and the two could become one flesh, is a wonderful gift. And it has wonderful expressions within it that show the depth of commitment and love and devotion and loyalty that a man can have for a woman in the bonds of marriage. Thus, it is an object lesson of the rich wonders of human love, which is itself a gift from God. Writer and theologian E.J. Young said it this way: not only does it speak of the purity of human love, but by its very inclusion in the canon, it reminds us of a love that is purer than our own. Looking at the flow of the Song of Songs, we see a three-act play unfolding in its pages. In chapter 1, Act 1, they meet. We see Solomon seeing the Shunammite and the Shunammite seeing Solomon, and it would seem to be love at first sight. In chapters 2 through 4, they court. Their love deepens as they spend time with one another, as they begin to know more about one another, as they learn one another's past and look at their life in the present, and just spending that time with one another, their love grows, which then moves into Act 3, they marry. And in this, we see expressions of love that they freely share with one another. I'd like to spend a little bit of time in one of those expressions in a few moments, but let's come to the epilogue, the high point of the passage, and that is the expression of the wonder of love that we find in chapter 8. And so really it's a very easy act to follow, and it reaches its climax in the expression of a desire for love to be strong and lasting, as love within a marriage ought to be. Doing a light study of this book can be done by looking at 4 big lessons that are found within the words of this beautiful love song. The first we find in chapter 2, verse 15, where the lover, at this point courting his bride-to-be, says to her, "Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyard. Our vineyards are in bloom." Now, he's not giving her a good agricultural tip, even though she did run a vineyard, or at least took care of her part of it. No, he's talking about their relationship. He's reminding her that it's the little things that can destroy the big thing. The big thing is the relationship. The little things are those little irritants or those little actions or thoughts or words that can be destructive. Here he talks about the little foxes, young foxes that would come into the vineyard and eat at the roots and the leaves of the vines that would render them incapable of producing the fruit that they were planted to produce. He says that they ruined the vineyard. And how true is it that it's the little things in the relationship that tend to destroy the relationship? Especially within marriage, seldom is a marriage destroyed because of one huge act of badness. More times than not, it's a lot of little things that lead to one big thing that bring a marriage down or destroy a relationship. He reminds his beloved that their vineyard is in bloom, so we need to be careful that we don't do things or say things or forget things that can, like the little foxes, ruin the vineyard that is in bloom, the relationship that is growing. One of my favorite parts of the Song of Songs is the way that the lover and his beloved express their love toward one another. It's found in 3 occasions within the book, chapter 4, chapter 5, and in chapter 7. In chapter 4, the courtship is just about over and they're moving into that time of betrothal and marriage. In chapter 5, they're married, and in chapter 7, they've been married a while. I want us to turn to chapter 7 because this is after they've been married for perhaps some time, and this is the husband expressing to his wife just how special she is. Now, he says some of these same words in chapter 4 and again in chapter 5, but I think 7 is significant because, well, they've been at it for a while. This is what he says. How beautiful your sandaled feet, O prince's daughter. Your graceful legs are like jewels, the work of a craftsman's hand. Your navel is a rounded goblet that never lacks blended wine. Your waist is a mound of wheat encircled by lilies. He talks about her neck, her eyes, her nose, her head. He goes from head to toe, expressing how beautiful she is to him. In words that may not express much to us. I'm not sure about reminding my wife that her hips are like mounds of wheat. I'm not sure that would fly very well. Calling her neck an ivory tower or her nose the Tower of Lebanon. Well, we look at that and think, well, that's an odd picture. Well, it may be odd to us, but it was beautiful to him. And he openly expresses just how wonderful his wife is. And this is as time has passed. And husbands need to do this for their wives, especially husbands towards wives, I think, because our culture sets such a ridiculous standard for the appearance of a woman. We see it in the tabloids, we see it on television, we see it in reality shows. This is what real women should look like. And, well, the reality of it is most women could never look like that. And I think it sets within them a sense of insecurity, and they wonder is that what my husband thinks I should look like? Well, husbands, speaking as one, we need to be willing to say to our wives just how special they are. Let's remember that time and gravity happen to us all. It affects the way we look. But even as we age, we ought to be able to look at our spouse and say, you're something. You are so beautiful. Wives need to express that back to their husbands as well, because men also need to know that they're special to their wives. The beloved, the wife of this story, does express that to her husband. Tells him how wonderful he is and invites him to be with her and to walk with her and to talk with her and to enjoy time with her, especially those intimate times of loving. Because he is special to her. She loves him, and to him he's a lusty roebuck, she says to her friends, but that may sound funny to us. The first time I heard the word roebuck, and this dates me a little bit, I thought, he's comparing her to a catalog that sells things, for those who remember Sears and Roebuck, and I know that's really a poor pun. But she expresses just how wonderful it is, and she tells it to people. She's not ashamed of her husband. He's not ashamed of his wife. They express it openly to one another and to others. Throughout the book, there is the expression of being careful. Don't jump ahead. I hope you've turned to Song of Songs. I want us to look at that expression as it's found in chapter 2, but it's repeated several times throughout the book. It says in chapter 2, verse 7, the beloved talking to her friends, "Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field." I have no idea what that means. I'm sure there's been good commentary on it, but I do know what this means. Do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. She's in courtship, and she realizes that jumping ahead in the relationship can destroy it. So she says we need to be careful that we don't become so aroused, that love isn't so awakened in us. And she's talking about that intimacy between a man and a woman, that we move ahead quickly, too quickly in the relationship, and before the guidelines are set and before the parameters are in place, we move into intimacy, because that can destroy and will destroy desire. It will destroy love between two people. A study was once done of how intimacy happens. The author of the study said that there are 10 steps. The first step is just that catching the eye across the room, and you notice one another. And then it moves to coming into closer proximity to one another, and then talking. And then eventually touching the hand and touching the arm, or that moves to touching the hair and the back of the neck, that moves then into more expressive ways of how you love, the kissing and caressing of love. And then finally, of course, the ultimate physical expression, and that is physical intimacy. He says that when those ways were followed and are followed, the love and the intimacy between the couple becomes so strong, because we're made to go in those baby steps. But culturally, we tend to jump ahead. The look across the room turns into a night in a hotel room, and we know how so often that ends in disaster. Only through the grace of God that it doesn't. So they're warning in here, be careful as your love develops, that you do not move too quickly, that you keep the steps in line, so that when you come to the time of marriage at the end of the book, there's only wonder and joy in the expression of intimacy. My favorite part of this book comes at the end in chapter 8, verses 6 and 7, where the beloved says to her husband something very profound. It does summarize the desire of this book when she says, "Place me like a seal over your heart and like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death, and jealousy is unyielding as the grave. It burns like a blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love, rivers cannot wash it away. If one were to give all the wealth in his house for love, it would be utterly scorned." Now, early when we looked at this as the nutshell of the passage, if you notice, it was worded a little bit differently toward the end. It talked about the blazing fire of God. Well, literally, and we'll come to that in a moment, that is what it's saying. But let's quickly work through this passage as we bring this overview of Song of Songs to an end. First, she wants her beloved, her lover, her husband, to know this about the relationship. She wants to know that his love for her is sealed away in the safe place of his heart. Now, we have to understand that the heart to the Jewish person was not the seat of the warm fuzzies, but the seat of the will. She wants to know that with all that is in him, he loves her, and that he's locked that away. He sealed it with the signet ring of the king. And anybody breaking that seal, well, Katie bar the door. You don't break what the king has sealed. And she wants to know that his love for her is safely tucked away. But she also wants to know that he wears that love as a seal on his arm. Two ideas there. One, that he loves her with great strength, that their love is true and strong and nothing can break it. But it's also wearing that love openly, saying to everyone around, I am married to this woman and I'm proud of it. We do that in our culture with a wedding band. We say to those who see it, I'm taken. I love someone else, and I love them enough to commit my life to them. And we wear that openly and proudly. She goes on to say that love is as strong as death. Now, as she talks about death in the grave, let's not get overly theologically analyzing this. This isn't talking in a theological sense. We know that death can be overcome and that the grave is defeated in Christ. They're not talking about that. What she is saying to her husband is, I want to know that your love is like death. Death never gives up. Death never lets go of the dead. I want to know that you'll never let go of our love. Again, we know that death has been defeated in Christ, but she's not talking theologically. She's talking romantically. And she knows that she's never known anyone that the grave has given up. And she wants to know that her husband's love for her is that way. He'll never give up. The same with as unyielding as the grave and as strong as death. That love will always be there. What words of security, and what security is needed in our marriages. Our spouses need to know that we never will give up, that love is there. We wear it proudly. We seal it deeply in our hearts. We will not let go. It's only in that security that we can make it through hard times as God empowers us to do that, because that security, that kind of love only comes from God. And it flows through us into our spouses. Then she says that she desires that love burns like a blazing fire. It's warming. It brings light. It brings comfort. There's passion. There's compassion. There's expressed love. And there's understood love. And she wants that love to be like the mighty flame of God. In the Hebrew, the last thought of fire there, the mighty flame that it says in the NIV, is literally the fire of Yah, the fire of Yahweh, the fire of the Lord. I believe what she would have us understand, what God would have us understand in this passage, is that when the love of God is burning in the lives and in the hearts of the husband and the wife, then there's nothing, as it says in the next part of the verse, nothing can put that out. So often our relationships end because the fire has died down, and the fire of love for one another has died down because our fire in the love that we have for God has died down. But as long as we are vibrantly in love with God, as long as His fire blazes within our hearts, then we can tap into His power and wisdom and can overcome any turmoil, any trouble that would separate a husband and a wife. I think one of the things that all of our marriages need, if we could give any gift on Valentine's Day, it would be the gift of the fire of the Lord. Letting our spouse know that we love God so much, and because of that we can love them so perfectly. That doesn't mean that our relationship will be perfect. Of course there'll be problems, but there won't be a divide. Verses 6 and 7 tell us of an undivided, undying love. And she says one more thing after she talks about the many waters. And boy, there are a lot of things that come against relationships, isn't there? The world can flood us with things that will work at quenching love and washing love away. Sadly, the number one thing in our culture today, where it used to be marriages divided because of infidelity, now the number one cause of divorce is financial issues, financial problems within the family. That torrent that will rush down and destroy families and destroy lives. Not even that torrent, when a heart is in love with God and is ablaze with the love of God, that torrent cannot put that love out. And so she says many waters can't quench it. But then she says one more thing, and something that we need to see here. She says if one were to give all the wealth in his house for love, it would be utterly scorned. Maybe the Beatles said it best, if that's possible, the singing group The Beatles from a long time ago, when they had the song, Can't Buy My Love. She's reminding her lover that she's not interested in his things. She's interested in him. She doesn't want everything that he can provide. He wants the love that he can provide. When we try to buy the love of another person and they find out that's what we're doing, it's just like this passage says, it is utterly scorned. You can't buy my love, but I will give it freely. I will love you because of you and not because of your things. 4 big lessons from the book of Song of Songs. It's a wonderful poem. I hope you'll take the time to read it. By the way, it is the second most unread book of the Bible. Leviticus is number 1. And it is the most untaught and preached from book of the Bible, even though there are some wonderful guides out there now for studying the book of Song of Songs. And I hope you'll take advantage of those. What did Jesus have to say about the Song of Songs? Well, he summarized it in Matthew, quoting himself from Genesis chapter 2, when he said, "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate." There are two things every marriage needs. Song of Solomon teaches us that we all need within our hearts, the heart of every husband and wife, we need the fire of God. Jesus adds the second when he says that we're to be united. The word in the Old Testament is the word to cleave. It comes from the carpentry shop, and it means to be tightly glued together. And any good carpenter knows that the strongest joint in a piece of wood is a glue joint. You can't break it there, and that's how God puts us together. So every relationship needs the glue and the fire, because we are meant to stay together when we're married. And God is the glue, because God has joined us together. Ponder it. And may your marriages be strong. And if you're not married, when that day comes, should that day come, may you bring into the marriage glue and fire. God bless you, and have a good day.